Athletes nowadays are treated like actual kings. These people are out here flying on private jets, sleeping on mattresses designed specifically for their spines, eating meals made by personal chefs and nutrition experts, while an entire squad of doctors constantly hovers around them, making sure their hydration levels don't drop by 2%. Now compare that to over 100 years ago. Athletes collapsing from dehydration, getting chased by wild dogs, and receiving medical assistance that somehow meant a lovely mix of brandy and rat poison. Yep. I'm talking here about the infamous 1904 Olympics in St. Louis, the first Olympics ever held in the United States, where its organizers woke up one day and thought, a simple marathon? Nah, let's turn this into a live-action survival challenge. But before we get into the marathon disaster itself, we need to talk about the Olympics around it, because the chaos didn't start on race day. You see, originally the 1904 Olympics were supposed to be in Chicago, but St. Louis also had something going on that year, the World's Fair. Officially called the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, it was basically America throwing itself a giant birthday party for the moment it bought a massive chunk of North America from France. The whole fair was meant to show off the glorious future of humanity. You had early X-ray machines, the radio phone, all that impressive early 1900s tech flexing. And then, right next to that, there were the so-called ethnic villages, which were basically human zoos where indigenous people were forced into staged performances for entertainment. Which, yeah, tells you a lot about the moral settings of the time. So naturally, the fair organizers didn't like the idea of sharing their spotlight with some other international event, and that's why they pushed hard to attach the Olympics to their event instead. That immediately created a logistical disaster. International athletes had to spend weeks crossing the Atlantic by ship before enduring a brutal 1,000-mile train ride across America. And just to make global travel even more enjoyable, the Russo-Japanese War had erupted earlier that year, making global travel even more complicated. The result was a strangely underpopulated Olympics. Just 12 nations appeared. And out of 651 competitors, only around 70 came from outside North America. And at the center of this chaotic circus was the marathon, the event which became one of the most scandalous disasters in sports history. If you look at any modern marathon today, races almost always begin early in the morning. Organizers do this for the extremely radical reason of not wanting their runners to liquefy in direct sunlight. So naturally, the officials at the 1904 Olympics decided to start the race at 3 p.m., precisely when the Missouri sun was at its most sadistic. That afternoon, temperatures climbed above 90 degrees Fahrenheit with brutal Midwestern humidity, so it felt like standing in the middle of a fire. And then there was the course itself. One official later described it as the most difficult a human being was ever asked to run over. The route stretched nearly 25 miles across unpaved dirt roads, jagged stone, choking dust, and 7 massive hills, ranging from 100 to 300 feet in elevation. Because the race took place on active public roads, runners also had to dodge streetcars, horse wagons, trains, and stray dogs, while automobiles roared beside them, blasting clouds of dust directly into their lungs. At this point, you might ask, surely they at least had water. Absolutely not. The runners were given only a single water station nearly 11 miles into the race, a contaminated well. By the halfway point, athletes were coughing up blood from the dust and collapsing from dehydration, and the only water they had was from a dirty open well, which reportedly made them vomit almost immediately. So out of the 32 runners who started the marathon, only 14 would make it to the finish line, and out of those 14, you really only need to hear about 3. The first winner to cross the finish line was Fred Lors, a bricklayer from New York who seemingly decided that 26 miles was far too long to be spent on one's own 2 feet. About 9 miles into the race, Lors succumbed to severe dehydration and cramps. But rather than seeking a medic or, quitting, he simply flagged down his manager's Buick and climbed into the passenger seat, like he was hailing an early 20th century Uber. For the next 11 miles, Lors enjoyed what may have been the most relaxed section of any Olympic marathon in history. Unfortunately, The car's engine eventually failed around mile 20, forcing him to continue on foot. But by then, Lors was of course more rested than everyone else, so he jogged the remaining distance to the finish line. The crowd lost its mind. Spectators cheered, officials celebrated. Alice Roosevelt, daughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, and basically the closest thing America had to royalty at the time, was preparing to place the victory wreath on his head when somebody in the crowd yelled that they had literally seen this man driving through the course earlier. The celebration collapsed instantly. Lors later claimed that the whole thing had just been a joke, and so the Olympic Committee, famously lacking a sense of humor, banned him for life on the spot. Then, there were Len Tao and Jan Masciani, two Swana runners from South Africa who were not even officially invited as athletes. They had originally come to St. Louis as a part of the World's Fair exhibitions, but instead ended up joining the marathon. Unlike most runners, they competed barefoot, which sounds impressive until you remember the course was basically made of rocks, dirt, and broken stone. Len Tao, in particular, was running an astonishing race and may have genuinely had a chance to finish near the top, right until he was chased off course by a pack of wild dogs and forced nearly a mile away from the route while sprinting for his life. And despite all of that, Len Tao still finished 9th, which might be the most impressive athletic achievement of the entire event. Now you'd think, after hearing all that, the official winner must have had the most normal race out of everyone. Yeah, absolutely not. We finally arrive at the official Olympic champion, Thomas Hicks, the man who technically won the marathon while being slowly poisoned to death by his own support team. By around mile 20, Hicks was in catastrophic condition. His face had turned pale gray, his body was shaking uncontrollably, and he could barely continue moving through the Missouri heat. Modern sports medicine would probably recommend hydration, electrolytes, or immediate medical attention. Hicks's trainers looked at this collapsing man and came to a different conclusion entirely. What if we give him stimulants?
Why didn't we think of this before?
So they fed him raw egg mixed with brandy and a dose of rat poison, which can act as a stimulant in very small amounts, but can also kill you. So maybe don't try this at home. Against all medical logic, it briefly worked. Hicks suddenly regained energy and staggered forward again. But a few miles later, the effects began wearing off and his condition collapsed even further. So naturally, his trainers responded by giving him even more rat poison and more brandy. Logical. By the final stretch, Hicks could barely walk. His trainers practically carried him across the finish line while his feet dragged underneath him. And somehow, this counted. Thomas Hicks officially won the Olympic marathon after losing nearly 8 pounds, suffering severe hallucinations, surviving multiple doses of rat poison, and being manually carried over the finish line by his own team. He collapsed immediately afterward and had to be rushed away for emergency treatment, though. So, yeah. The 1904 Olympic Marathon was such a disaster that it almost killed off the marathon as an Olympic event altogether. Looking back today, it's one of those stories you don't know whether to laugh at or be horrified by. And if you're into more unbelievable real-life stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button.